Airships have always gotten people's attention. Airships are magical. They're fascinating. Whenever you'll see an airship in the sky.
We see that already. There are several airship projects that are already being initiated. So it seems that the airship industry has been reborn.
Nearly a century after falling out of favor, airships could be on the rise again.
Do that.
Backed by new research and technology, companies are aiming to take advantage of this free lift to fill in some gaps underserved by current infrastructure. And of course, there's always the excitement factor.
It's a type of aircraft that seems to generate an emotional response.
But for airships to go from alternative reality to a reality,
opposition.
A century ago, airships, dirigibles, and zeppelins were at the cutting edge of luxury transport, ferrying passengers non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean decades before the jet age. Today, the number of active airships has dwindled to a few dozen worldwide, mostly used for novelty rides or as floating billboards, make them into a more common sight in the skies. Some, like LTA Research, funded by Google co-founder Sergey, companies have only released computer-generated visions of what they hope to build. A few, however, have been able to actually fly a prototype.
It is the largest aircraft in the world. Makers boasted that they had created a new breed of hyper-efficient aircraft.
This is the Airlander 10, endearingly nicknamed the Flying Buttocks. It makes up for what it lacks in style by offering what could be one of the greenest ways to travel by air. Using around 1.2 million cubic feet of lighter-than-air helium, the craft can cruise at a top speed of about 80 miles per hour. Originally designed as a surveillance platform by the US military, the project was canceled in 2020. Its second test flight left some onlookers feeling, let's just say, deflated.
Oh my god, he's actually just broken it.
Thankfully, far from the worst airship disaster of all time, the Airlander eventually returned to the skies for more testing. Since 2017, troubling as it looks, falling, ideally more gracefully, is actually a key feature of how the craft flies. As the company name Hybrid Air Vehicle suggests, Airlander is what's known as a hybrid airship, that is, achieving lift from a combination of conventional airship design and aerodynamic attributes from other flying aircraft. The principal element at play is helium, the lighter-than-air gas that has the added perk of being non-flammable, unlike the hydrogen that doomed the infamous Hindenburg. Just like a toy balloon, with enough helium, the ship will rise, essentially free lift.
The trouble with it, we've done that by making the aircraft generate aerodynamic lift. So it takes off and lands like a conventional aircraft, although in a really short space. That lift is effectively only lifting the payload. That's the easiest way to think of it.
This means that without the aerodynamic lift, the craft is actually heavier than air, more like an airplane. Without the lift generated by forward motion, the airship sinks down and, more importantly, stays on the ground.
And the reason that's with a hybrid aircraft, we're on the ground for that loading and unloading cycle. It allows us to turn the aircraft around quickly and drive the economic performance of the aircraft as an asset.
This means the craft can take off and land from any reasonably flat surface like grass, water, or even ice. And according to HAV, the base model that uses 4 combustion engines will reduce CO2 emissions by 75% over comparable aircraft, and future plans to have transport and even passenger travel.
When I think about passenger transport, it's such an exciting space to move a technology like this into, because it can change our expectations. Water to cross. And our choices are to travel out to an airport, do a very fast but very short flight, and then travel back in from the airport at the other end. Or we can get on a ferry that's 3 times the journey length. And the right thing to do here from a carbon footprint perspective is to get on the ferry, but it's such a time impact for people. With Airlander, what we offer is almost a high-speed train of the sky. Added to that, the aircraft will go point to point. It's not constrained to airports that we have today. So like a helicopter, it'll take off and land away from the airport. So we can open up a whole new journey.
I mean, obviously, we could go on a 3-day cruise, if you like.
Spaces, and what you can't see is down at the other end of this cabin from where I'm sat, there are 8 double bedrooms for overnight cruises. This allows the leisure sector to offer their clients experiences that you just can't get anywhere else.
Their approach harkens back to the early 20th century, when luxurious airships were the premium option for well-heeled passengers on transatlantic journeys. But building a sophisticated-looking bar and filling it with an impressive wine selection is still a far way from a happy hour in the skies.
A luxury.
Beyond passenger travel, the prospect of low-emission transport without the need for major infrastructure could also have a profound impact in another space: cargo. This is the LTA-60T, an airship with a cargo capacity of up to 60 tons, making it even larger than HAV's Airlander 10. It's the dream of Paris-based. With funding from the French government, Flying Whales began to develop an airship that could fly into the remote mountains of France to retrieve logs for processing into lumber. As you might guess from only...
So here is the global view. You can see the external shape details here, the stations for the propellers, on the left side, on the right side, and also the stations for the Z propellers. We are very huge, 200 meters in length and 50 meters in height. And we have a rigid body, which means we don't change shape according to the environmental conditions.
This model of the LTA-60T is designed to carry wood logs, but the company believes it can also be used to efficiently carry other cumbersome cargo like high-voltage towers or wind turbine blades. Transporting large, bulky items on today's infrastructure, let's just say, can run into some challenges. And for remote areas like northern Canada, it could open up entirely new industries and resources in regions lacking traditional land or air infrastructure. But with airships, loading and unloading cargo has a big technical caveat.
Is that when you release the cargo and you release its weight, what's going to stop the airship from just popping up into the sky because it's now a lot lighter? So you've got to exchange that load somehow.
There are a few different ways to overcome this. The most obvious solution might be to dynamically adjust the quantity of gas.
So it needs a lot of R&D, and I think this technology is going to be available in something like 5 to 10 years.
Until then, another option is offsetting weight with engine thrust. But this would largely defeat the efficiency benefits of an airship in the first place. Instead, Flying Whales is considering a more balanced solution. If a trip calls for transporting, say, 30 tons of wind turbine blades, it would need to pick up another 30 tons to replace the weight after drop-off, with the help of thrusters to help compensate during the transfer process. In the example of retrieving wood from remote regions, it would need to carry the equivalent weight in water on the trip out, then dispense that water dynamically as it lifts wood in order to achieve balance. Which, visually at least, kind of looks like a flying whale.
In theory, it can be simple, but in practical, it is not, because it's a dynamic period. And during this dynamic period, you have to be very careful on the equilibrium between buoyancy and weight.
As if this didn't sound complicated enough, airships face another major vulnerability: weather.
The side of an airship is like a giant wall. It's like a giant sail. And there is something we call sail effect. If you have a really, really big...
Okay, in our case, we are something like a flying crane.
We are today the designer of the airship, but tomorrow will be the producer and the operator. So in the future, our business model will be based on 2 things: the production and direct sale of the airship by Flying Whales industry, and the transportation services provided by Flying Whales Services.
Flying Whales hopes to be flying their airship by late 2024. In the meantime, they will test and finalize their design while working with aviation regulators to approve the designs for flight.
Building any
planet might take a mix of ingenuity and adopting unconventional approaches. And that begins with niche applications of new, unproven, and even unprofitable tech, for the time being at least.
The two challenges you have,
Build our understanding and build our customers' understanding and financiers' understanding of the market gap that exists that we don't usually spot because it's a gap. We're not good and attuned at seeing gaps until after somebody comes and puts a product into them. In aviation, we're dream makers and dream deliverers, and